Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Business in Calgary podcast, powered by Sonic Coaching. I'm your host, Oliver Basner. I'm pleased to be speaking with Jim Bertram, who recently was inducted to the Alberta Business Hall of Fame by Junior Achievement Southern Alberta. He's served on several corporate boards, including currently as board chair of Keyera Corp, where he's the founder and the original president and CEO. Jim, welcome. And first of all, congratulations on getting inducted to the Alberta Hall of Fame, and also for being on the cover of the September issue of Business in Calgary magazine.
Well, thanks, Oliver. I just saw the magazine here for the first time, so I didn't recognize myself.
You look pretty good in color, don't you?
But I appreciate the induction into the Junior Achievement Hall of Fame. It's a great honor, and there's just a lot of great business people, so I'm a little bit humbled by it as well. But no, it's all good.
Wonderful. Well, why don't we jump in? So I want to start right at the beginning. So, tell us a little bit about where you grew up, your childhood. What was that like growing up?
Well, I was joking with some friends. I said, I'm just a typical business guy in downtown Calgary that came from small town Saskatchewan. And, there's...
Real small town.
Real small town, Piapot, Saskatchewan. Today, there's not more than 30 people there. But when I was there, it was bustling 200 people. So my family, dad and mom, were both born there and both passed away there. I mean, they were small town people, and so I grew up very much in a farming, ranching, rural community. Lived in town, but I spent a lot of time on my uncle's farms, working hard and really living the simple life. But that was my start for the first 16 years of my life.
Okay, excellent. And your early career, I hear you were a pretty good hockey player. So why don't you tell us about that? Well, played a little bit of pro as well over in Europe.
Yeah, again, small town Saskatchewan, there's not a lot to do. So in the summertime, I played baseball, and fall I played football, and the wintertime I played hockey. And being in Piapot, we had a rink, but of course it was an outdoor rink.
Right.
And I would skate a lot and play, but no official games. So I didn't play organized hockey till I was 13, and I had to go to Maple Creek, and I played 3 years of organized hockey, Bantam, 2 years, and a year of midget, and then left Saskatchewan at 16 to go play junior hockey in Alberta. So I played a year in Drumheller, and then 3 years with the Medicine Hat Tigers back in the 70s.
And then how'd you end up in Europe?
Well,
because you played in Germany. Didn't you?
So after I graduated at 19 from the Western Canada Hockey League, I made the tough decision. I said, I don't think I'm going to play in the NHL, so it's time to go to school. Mm-hmm. So I came to the University of Calgary and played 4 years with Dr. George Kingston and Gord Cowan as coaches for the Dinosaurs.
Right.
And I wanted to go to a year. We'd spent one summer as a hockey team over. We probably played 15 games over there, and I decided that a good way to end my career would be playing in Europe. So when I got an opportunity to do that, I went over and played a season in Germany. And I knew it was going to be the last year of my hockey career.
Right.
But it was a nice little town, Straubing in the Black Forest. Played hockey and drank a little bit of German beer, and really opened my eyes. But it also kind of got me focused on, okay, what's the next part of your life?
Absolutely.
Which led to business.
Well, most of my family, my heritage is from down in that area, so I know that area well.
Well, it was 81 when I was there, and and you think about it, it was really only 35 years after the war ended,
right?
And so there was evidence all around me, both from people who have been impacted by the war, and buildings still, and
right.
And so it was really interesting. And my dad was in the war on the Canadian side, and landed D-Day +1 and came up through France, Belgium, and Holland. So I was interested in it,
yes.
But I loved it. I loved the German people, and I was treated very nice. But when it was over, it's time to come back and
Absolutely.
get after it.
Nothing like a good German beer, though, right? So
I haven't found one better. They've been doing it for 500 or 600 years, so
they're
they're
pretty
just
good
better
at
at it than
yeah,
we are.
exactly. Yeah, let's move over to the company that you actually grew. So let's talk about Keyera. You took it into being a large Canadian midstream company, over 1,500 employees. How'd you go from hockey to the energy sector? Like, did you just make that decision to go there? Or?
No, I really enjoyed some of the energy classes and economics classes I took at university, and just happened that our assistant coach at the time, Gord Cowan, was a vice president of human resources for an energy company, and he hired four of us one summer to come in and work as summer students. And at that time, it was a company called Aquitaine, which is a big French multinational company. Mm-hmm. Did that, led to a full-time job, and I spent a year in human resources. Then I went into the corporate economics group for 4 or 5 years, and really opened my eyes to the whole exploration and production side of the E&P business. And then I moved around, to 2 or 3 companies. From Aquitaine became Keyera. From Keyera, I went and worked for a company called POCO, which was run by Al Markin,
right?
And saw Al Markin's leadership, and then I went to work for a company out of New York City, Amerada Hess.
Okay.
And John Hess just sold his company to Chevron here recently, and got 7 or 8 years of really good experience there. And by this time I've moved into the marketing world.
Right.
And so I was managing the sale of oil and natural gas liquids. And then Hess got bought out by Petro-Canada, and I had a decision to make: either go to New York City or Houston with Hess, or take a package and find a job in Calgary. And
right.
I decided that a package would allow me to pay off my house, and my son was young, up and coming hockey player, so I just couldn't steal that from him. So I thought I'd take some time off and enjoy a few months, and along came golf, and offered me a job of vice president of the marketing group at Golf, which was a big group at the time. And I said, sure, I'd love to take the job, but I'd like to take a few months off and and get recharged up. And Dick Auchinleck was president at the time. He said, how about a week? I said, fine. So I was a bad negotiator.
A week.
So I jumped into Golf, and it was a big group. I was probably managing 100 people, and we were managing all the Alberta Crown barrels for oil, and we had a bunch of gas and NGLs. But after, they had a big operation in Indonesia, so I was back and forth to Indonesia, and we're trying to find gas markets over there, and I was spent a lot of time with another individual, Dave Smith, who was on the finance side, and Golf at the time was thinking of doing an IPO for the Gulf Indonesia assets.
Right.
So when we're over there, of course, we're working, but we spent lots of nights, talking about the business, and sort of throughout that period, we said, Gulf's got some wonderful assets that would be ideal for a midstream company. Mm-hmm. And the model isn't that unique. There's a lot of companies in the U.S. had midstream companies
right.
at the time, and so. We sort of said, look, we could be like these guys, and at the time there really wasn't a midstream company in Alberta. We had TransCanada and Enbridge, which was called Interpipe at the time, but they were pipeline companies, and a midstream company had more pieces to it. So, anyways, Gulf was was becoming very international, and they had moved their headquarters to Denver. I was one of 2 vice presidents that were still stayed back in Calgary. And during that time, I proposed, Dave Smith and I proposed that, hey, if you let us take some assets and some people, we think we could probably raise $500 million. And
right.
At the time, Gulf wanted to buy down their debt so they could be a little more aggressive in some of these other countries. So they said, well, if you think you can do it, let's go for
They
it.
took the deal. It was about 300 people that went with you, right?
we took the assets, select assets, and about 300 people. I said, pulled them out of golf and crossed the sea, and that's a brave new world. And it was a big jump because a lot of those people had been at golf their whole career.
Right.
And here we were offering something that untested, and to convince them to come was pretty easy. But there's some big commitments there, and
Yes.
so we took the assets and the people, and we brought in a partner out of New York called Keyspan. They were a big public utility, the old Brooklyn Union company, and so we ran this for about maybe a year as a 50-50 partnership between golf and Keyspan, and then Keyspan bought the second half, so we became, an arm of Keyspan.
Right.
And then Keyspan came to us like a year later and said, guys, your risk profile is a little different than ours as a 100-year-old utility, and we've got a chance to buy some other utilities. Do you think you could sell yourself? So, we were ready for anything at the time. So we said, sure, we'll sell it, and we went down the road to sell the company. And in the meantime, there's an income trust were being
Right.
developed, and we said, look, if Keyspan, if you're patient, we think we could put this into an income trust and do a public offering and put more money back in your hands, but it might take a year or two to do that. And they said, go for it. So we did a public offering in 2003 as Keyspan. Within probably 18 months, we had a second and a third public offering, and we were now 100% owned by the public, and we were called Keyspan Income Trust. But once we had 100% owned by the public, Keyspan said, well, we need your name back because we might come back to Canada. And we had a great listing on the Toronto Exchange, KEY.UN, and so we said, that's fine, we'll come up with a new name. And so Dave and I said, let's the new name's got to start with Key, because
Right.
we can't lose this great
listing.
offering,
Yeah.
listing. So we had a contest inside Keyera at the time and said, okay, we need a new name. It's got to start with Key. So winner is going to get a weekend for two at Kananaska's Lodge. So, we gave everybody 10 days, I think, to come up with the best, and sat down, and I think it was a lawyer in our company at the time. His wife came up with Keyera. We said, this is good. Key facilities for a new era. And
Right.
played around with the font a little bit. John Cobb was our investor relations guy. He threw some orange blobs out in front of it, and which I had no idea what they were, but we came out of golf, which was kind of blue and orange were their colors. We said, this feels good. So
Nice.
simple as that.
And hence Keyera still around today.
Keyera still
right?
around. Now we went from Keyera Income Trust
Right.
to Keyera, and today we're just Keyera Corp.
Right. Now let's jump into the business of business, because growing a company from 300 people to 1,500 today, 1,500 plus today, I mean, it doesn't come without its challenges, right? And how do you, for our listeners, how do you overcome those challenges? How do you stay the course? I mean, there had to, success is not a straight line. There had to be some tough slugging at some point. How'd you do that?
It was like a pendulum, and it's hard to get it going, and at the start, and we had no idea what these assets would spit out in terms of cash flow, and you have to remember we took assets from an E&P company and 300 people from an E&P company, and now we said, now we're in the service business. All those E&P guys that you competed against for the last 20 years, they're your customers.
They're customers now, yeah.
We have to obsess over those people, and we had a few joint venture engineers had a hard time getting their head around, that guy that I've been battling with for the last 20 years is now my customer. So, but I think we had some, a few things that we were going to focus on, and one was, customer service, and The other was obviously safety. We were running some very complicated plants that could be dangerous, sour gas plants, and but we understood the geology, and we understood how producers thought, and one of the things we did originally, the plants we took out of Gulf were all west of I call them west of the number 2 between Calgary and Edmonton, which is roughly the west of the 5th meridian.
Right.
Into the deeper part of the basin, the gas there tends to be liquids rich with natural gas liquids, propane, butane, and condensate, and that became a big part of our business. And we went out with that in mind, and we also had great assets in the Edmonton, Fort Saskatchewan region: pipelines, fractionation plants, cavern storage. Fort Saskatchewan is an energy hub, the energy hub in Western Canada, where you have fractionation and petrochemicals, and you got refineries, and so everything comes into Edmonton or Fort Saskatchewan.
Right.
So yeah, we had lots of challenges, but we were cruising along after 3 or 4 years, and the income trust market went away.
It did.
Stephen Harper said
Remember
no.
that.
And so, for a couple of weeks we thought our world had ended. And then we said, well, it's a good business model. We've been raising equity from the market. Why don't we just do it as a corporation? And looking back, going from a income trust, which was a very conservative model, to a corporation where we said we got to grow.
Right.
We had no obstacles to growing, and probably was the best thing ever happened to us. But we initially thought our world had come to an end, and we said, no, this is going to be a growth story. We're so confident in this company, in this business model, that let's just grow it. If we can demonstrate to our shareholders that we've got growth, we'll have no problem raising equity, and we didn't.
Well, and I'm guessing that's also how you kept your employees on board too, right? Because they would have had some concerns too, right?
Yeah, a little bit, but their big concern was out the gate. They coming from Gulf, where they were cocooned, and into this business model where, so they already had the mindset, and I had a chance to really pick who was coming with me out of Gulf, and so the people that came, they really loved their assets. These were process engineers and operators that lived in Rocky Mountain House and Rimbey, Alberta, and Nordegg, and then of course Edmonton, Fort Saskatchewan was a big part of our place. So, but if I got one thing right, it was I made sure Dave Smith was coming with me, because he was doing all the hard work. But we brought some really good leaders,
Right.
people that believed in team. And, that's where I think I always say my first degree was, the back of the bus in the Western Canada Hockey League. You learn a lot about teamwork. And,
Yes, you do.
And you got to get along with everybody on a team. And sometimes your best players aren't the best teammates. And you also learn how to get out of bed after you've had your tail beat off
Right.
the night before. And business isn't about winning every day, So I think I came into that world very, very upbeat and positive, and I treated people sort of how I might treat a team that I coached. And I just think we had a good culture. But we worked hard at it. Everybody was allowed to disagree with Jim and Dave. It was open. Nobody got fired for disagreeing.
And did they?
Yeah, we had lots of battles. Dave and I are. It's interesting. Dave Smith's a Harvard MBA, bright, maybe one of the brightest guys that I've been around, and I'm a Saskatchewan farm boy with Bachelor of Commerce that played hockey, and
has work ethic.
Yeah, work ethic. We probably come at things a little differently,
Right.
And we had lots of debates, and we had a lot of fun. We had open concept, our office space, and Dave and I would be standing there debating something, and maybe getting a little bit loud, and you could see people kind of looking at us, and we played it up a little bit. I'd take one side, he'd take the other, and we'd battle back and forth, and they'd say, okay, you're right, let's do that. Or the next day it'd be, okay, you're right. And we never ever did we ever get mad at each other. but we had great debates, and I think everybody realized that, hey, these guys love a good debate, and I think it was a good way to run a company, because you get people to tell you, I think you're wrong about this. This is the way I see it, and we'd listen. I think a good leader has to listen. So I think that's what got us off on the right foot. And then as we got bigger, it gets harder and harder to do that. You have to have a little more process and a little more structure. And like you said, we have 1,500 people, but that's before we rolled in our latest acquisition of Plains Petroleum, which is going to take us from roughly a $10 billion market cap to 15 billion. So there's some more people.
It's a lot of integration too.
Some real good people are going to come over from Plains to work with us, and we're very excited by that.
Right. Well, that's fantastic. So I also know that you believe in giving back. I mean, you're a big supporter of Stars Air Ambulance and the United Way, and first of all, why do you think it's important to give back for leaders and companies to give back? But also, I think there's a story as to why you picked Stars as well. So
yeah, I think United Way, it's just such a successful, organization in Canada, and the companies that I'd worked for, and especially golf, they were big United Way. So we came over to Keyera. We wanted to make it special, and we'd have a United Way week, and we'd have things going on every day to make money for United Way, and we always would match anything that the employee would give,
right,
as well. And it's kind of a way we picked our leaders. We'd always pick two new, up and coming leaders to sort of lead United Way and give them the old pep talk about, hey, you're here because we see you as a future leader, and we want you to come up with a great program. And they loved the challenge. And
right.
We want you to be better than those guys last year. And so we had a lot of fun, lots of games. And, sometimes they used to make the executives do some god-awful things. So it was a chance for them to poke us a little bit too. But at the end of the day, we're always, and we always got, it was great to get United Way speakers in and talk to our employees. And I just think we wanted our young people to start giving early in their career. Sometimes people wait till they're retiring or older to give, and I even now I'm after my children to be, hey, it's time for you guys to start giving back to the community. And I think that's what we tried to accomplish there is, it doesn't have to be a lot, but just get used to the fact that you're giving. And there's so many people out there with the need. So
yes,
that was the United Way was always easy. I think the Stars Air Ambulance, when we heard their story, and this was early on, we said, we have a dozen gas plants in rural Alberta, and some of them even up in rural BC. And people, our operators and our families are all rural. They're driving to work every day.
Right.
They're driving to school in school buses, and I said, if there's ever a charity we should be getting behind, it's those guys. They're gonna save our employees' lives someday out there. And of course, gas plants can have accidents, and we had phone numbers on the wall of every control room. If there was ever an incident, boom, there's your Star Air Ambulance. Right. They could be on the phone. So we became big supporters, and even today I just had a recent email from our general counsel. She's being kidnapped by the Stars Air Ambulance, and she's already trying to get in everybody's pocketbook, so
to get out of jail.
So she's tough, and I'm sure she'll do a great job. But those are things, and of course, we let our field people and people in Edmonton, Fort Saskatchewan, they pick their charities too. So we want to make sure we're giving back to the communities where we're actually out
right.
working in, because we're put a gas plant in the middle of the forest out in Rocky Mountain House. We want people to know we care about them as
right.
well.
So what do you see for the future for the energy sector?
Well, I'm an optimist, and I just think Alberta's got such an enormous resource here with the oil sands and conventional oil and gas and now with the ability with technology breakthrough in terms of being able to drill 3-4 miles horizontally and frack. I mean, the E&P side of this business, they've just made such breakthroughs. It's taken the resource base in Alberta and just exploded it. So we got gas and oil for decades, if not, hundreds of years. So that's a positive. And the world needs more energy, I think that, we've had 10 years of we're going to be the cleanest country in the world from a carbon CO2 perspective, and I think we're starting to realize that everybody wants the world to be a better place. Everybody wants to have a good environment, but I think we went at it way too fast, and we've got to look at the long-term strategy around the whole energy transition, or I call it energy evolution, because we need all of the above. We need renewables, solar, wind, but we do need hydrocarbons. And I think we're starting to realize that after 10 years. And even the new Prime Minister Carney, I'm cautiously optimistic that he's going to undo a bunch of things that really hurt Alberta and hurt our industry. And
unfortunately, he's a Westerner, from his younger days, right?
He comes from and spent a lot of time at Edmonton, and he's a hockey player. Now he was a goalie, so maybe that's a little different. But he's a smart guy, and you know what? If he wants to be an energy superpower, he's got to get out of the way a little bit more than the last 10 years Liberal government did. And I think we in the industry, hey, we can raise money and we've got some really, really good economic projects. We just feel like we've had to, spend most of our time getting regulatory approvals for them. And not that we don't need, a good solid regulation base, but I just think we went too far. So I think that we're going to have some practicality back in the game here, hopefully, and that'll just unleash a lot of good things in Alberta,
and hopefully a little bit of common sense.
That's exactly what we need, is common sense. And I sit on 2 other boards that I tried to. I wanted to get a different perspective, so I sit on the board of Emera out of Halifax, sit on the board of Methanex out of Vancouver, and I spent some time in Toronto taking my ICD program there. I just wanted to. I started to think that maybe I've spent too much time in the West and in Alberta, and I wanted to get a feel for what do people in Halifax, Nova Scotia think? What do people in Toronto think? What do people in Vancouver think? They think a lot different than we do, They do. And I think that's helped me understand maybe their perspective a little more. But now, in being on those boards for 4 or 5 years, even the board members that I 5 years ago wasn't sure were getting it, this whole energy transition, they're starting to become more practical. Everybody's becoming more practical around energy. They realize Canada needs it. And if we want to get to the next level in Canada, and I just think there's a real cost to going as fast as we were going on energy transition, and I think we're starting to see it. We saw it in inflation, and Mr. Carney's got to make some very drastic decisions, and he's sort of hinting at that. That's because we haven't been very prudent, running our country, and if there's ever going to be an industry that's going to bail us out, it's going to be the energy business.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I've got a couple of questions I ask all my guests. So let me ask the first one. So, when you think back, the beginning of your journey, what do you wish somebody would have told you back at the beginning of the journey? The listener out there who's at the, the start of their journey. Like, what's that advice or that wisdom you could pass on?
Well, I think, you got to have work ethic. You got to be prepared to work hard, and that's probably not 40 hours a week. But I think the thing that I did, and I didn't do it, I didn't plan it, I just sort of fell into it, is I broadened my base.
Right.
I didn't get pulled into one job and say you're going to become an expert at this. I moved around from HR to corporate economics, from people to number crunching to marketing in an unregulated world at the right time. But I moved around companies too. Sometimes companies don't do a good job of managing your career, and I saw that, and I wasn't sort of disappointed. I just said sometimes there's a limit to how they can manage your career. So you have the option to manage your own career, and I did. And when I felt like I could stay where I'm at in a nice, comfortable job but I wasn't probably going to move anywhere for 5 years, or I could go take a chance and learn something new, I went and learned something new.
Right.
And I never had a problem getting along inside a company. I never walked away from a company because I was mad or left anything behind. But I would just say manage your own career. I think I tell my wife this last night. One of the things I read that made a lot of sense. People talk. You don't find yourself. You create yourself. And I think with your career, you got to create your career. Don't wait for somebody to do it. You create it. And some people. I never started out with the idea that I was going to be a CEO anywhere. Heck, coming from small town Piapot, Saskatchewan, I was just lucky to get out of Saskatchewan. Don't tell my friends in Saskatchewan, but
They might not be listening, so
well, that's but hey, this town's full of people from Saskatchewan.
Of course it is.
But I think you have to work hard, get some breaks, but you got to be positive too,
Right.
and treat people right. Just
Right.
treat them right everywhere you go. I was fortunate. Peter Lougheed was my chairman for the first 10 years of Keyera, and Peter's a wonderful man. And I was playing junior hockey when Peter was premier, so I wasn't very involved or tuned into politics in Alberta. I was focused on hockey. But Peter was a wise man. But when we'd get together before board meetings, he didn't want to get into the weeds or details, but how are the people?
Right.
And so I think if I learned anything, it's treat people right.
Right.
Treat people right. And
it's interesting, I don't know if our listeners caught it, but I caught it, and don't go find yourself, create yourself. I mean, that's a nugget worth writing down.
Yeah.
So I love that.
Yeah, I always, go back to high school, when kids are saying, I got to go find myself, I don't know. I think
You got to go create yourself.
I think I started creating myself at 13, I'm going to be a hockey player and we'll see where that takes me. And,
but then, be open to pivoting too, right?
Yeah, you got to pivot. You got to pivot.
Great wisdom, thank you. And then, the other thought here is, I personally believe personal development and self-development are one and the same. And so, what's that one sort of favorite, self-development book or tool that you could recommend?
Well, I'm a big believer in goal setting, and that, early in my career, I had a tape, and I can't remember who did it, but it was all about goal setting. This guy was just, and I got so pumped up, I put that tape on a dozen times a year and listened to setting up goals and holding yourself accountable.
Right.
I read a lot of the business books, and they're all good, but I don't know if it was one book that got me focused more than anything else. I was probably people. It's probably the people, like I said, the leaders that I was around, Peter Lougheed, John Hess, Al Markin. These guys.
So those mentors,
they
right?
were mentors, and even teammates.
Yep.
I mean, even go back to the coaches at University of Calgary. I mean, in some ways, business is not dissimilar in that you want ice time, you earn it. You want to be in the power play, you got to earn it, because you don't put a checker on the power play. You put a goal scorer on the power play, and so every practice, every game, every shift, you got to earn it. And when I was at Keyera, I'd always use the old coach saying, we had lots of wins, but I'd say, great, we're going to celebrate it, but you're only as good as remember tomorrow, you're only as good as your last shift. And I was out with a couple of the guys last week, and they were joking, still joking, saying, "Oh, yeah, you're still only as good as your last shift." And but that's kind of what business is all about. You know, you work hard, you win some, but boy, you got to get out of bed the next day looking for the next one.
It's true.
Being aggressive.
You know, it's funny you talk about goals, because this was a few years ago now. I came across a sheet I wrote, decades ago when I was, writing my own goals, right? Because I'm a big believer in goal setting. And, one of the goals was, I wanted to hit $100,000 in income, right? And I kind of remember looking at it and I go, man, I should have shot for a lot higher back then. But back then that was a big number, right? When you're young and, six figures looks like a big sticker.
I was joking. When I was 13 and I wanted to play junior hockey, I was possessed. And, on the ice, sometimes 7-8 hours a day, in small town Saskatchewan, you can do that. And I wanted to play junior hockey in Medicine Hat. And I did. But I said, I should have set my goal a little higher.
Exactly.
I should have said the NHL. So I missed that one.
Yeah. Hindsight's always 20/20.
Exactly.
Though, so.
Exactly.
Well, you know what? We're out of time, but I really do appreciate you sitting down with me and spending some time. I mean, I think there was some great nuggets from this conversation, so I hope people were taking notes. And again, congratulations on the award, and well earned.
Thanks, Oliver. I'm very humbled by that award. Like I said, I've met so many people that I think are just fabulous, and when I look back at some of the laureates, you go, gee, how do you measure up against those icons? But anyways, I'm happy, and I'm happy I could share a few nuggets.
Awesome, thank you. So this has been the Business of Calgary podcast, powered by Sonic Coaching, and watch for our next episode in a couple of weeks. Thanks, everyone.